Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the poetry of Mahadevi, also known as Aka Mahadevi or Mahadevyaka in some cases. Aka, AKKA, as I understand it, was a sort of term of reverence because Mahadevi became like the poet laureate, basically, of a 12th century Bakhti sect in India called the Virshiavas. And that the Virshiavas were basically founded by Basarana, who I've done a video about before, and Mahadevi came to join them. She left her abusive husband, medal for her for that, and she sort of became a wandering mystic, and she found a spiritual home with the Virshiavas, who were dedicated to the worship of Shiva. Shiva is one of the three principal deities of Hinduism, along with Brahma and Vishnu. And the Bakhti, basically the Bakhti was a movement or a set of movements somewhat in response, in some cases at least, in response to the introduction of Islamic monotheism into India. It was a kind of monotheizing, making monotheistic of Hinduism, which is, of course, a polytheistic faith with a panoply of gods. But the Bhakti sort of said, all right, we're going to identify one god from the Hindu pantheon who is the god, either the only god or the primary god. And for the Virshiavas, that was Shiva. Mahadevi had a very particular relationship with Shiva in that she identified herself as his earthly wife. So the sort of spiritual relationship that Mahadevi had with Shiva was both spiritual, but also physical, sensual, sexual, whatever it is. And her poetry reflects this kind of intermingling of the spiritual and the sexual within this structure of divine love. So I'm going to read you a couple of her poems that reflect that sort of idea, and then a couple of other poems that reflect other elements of her religious philosophy. Now, the poems don't have titles as such, so I'll identify. They do have numbers here. I'm reading this out of the Norton Anthology of World Literature, by the way. They do have numbers, but the numbers are not in themselves meaningful. So I'll identify them for you by the first line. So the first one I'm going to read is like a silkworm weaving. Like a silkworm weaving her house with love from her marrow and dyeing in her body's threads, winding tight round and round, I burn, desiring what the heart desires. Cut through, O Lord, my heart's greed, and show me your way out, O Lord, white as jasmine. O Lord, white as jasmine, by the way, that's a continual refrain in Mahadevi's poetry. This is her sort of distinctive address to Shiva. And my understanding, based on the introductory material from the Norton, is that this let me see if I can find it really quickly. Their reference. Oh yeah. So it says here that she fell in love with the form in which the god was represented in her village temple as Mallikarjun, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. I apologize if I am. The Lord white as jasmine. So it was a sort of distinctive depiction of Shiva as a very white statue. And that was the version of Shiva that Mahadevi carried in her mind, apparently throughout the remainder of her fairly short life. But this idea of like building devotion, building her house with love from her marrow, the physicality of it, the visceral nature of Mahadevi's poetry here. I burn desiring what the heart desires. This is, again, it's more like love poetry than it is like what we in the West traditionally think of as devotional poetry, right? There is definitely a spiritual element here, but it is the sort of ecstatic, it's the ecstatic experience of somebody like Madhuri Kempe, these sort of medieval saints who experienced this sort of divine interpenetration of their souls and bodies. This isn't the sort of staid religious poetry that we often think of as devotional poetry in particularly the Western Christian tradition. We see the same kind of thing, this rapturous embrace of a divine sexualized love in a poem like 4 Parts of the Day. 4 parts of the day I grieve for you. 4 parts of the night I'm mad for you. I lie lost, sick for you, night and day, O Lord white as jasmine. Since your love was planted, I've forgotten hunger, thirst, and sleep. I mean, that's love poetry. That's straight up love poetry, right? That's the romantic tradition, the chivalric tradition almost of courtly love poetry. This idea of losing the self in the beloved, of losing oneself in the other, of sort of not transcending, but just ignoring the physical needs. I've forgotten hunger, thirst, and sleep. This idea that your love, the love of the beloved, so overwhelms me that even my physiological needs are immaterial to me. They no longer matter because all that matters is the love of the beloved. Again, this is the ecstatic tradition, as opposed to the sort of subdued devotional poetry tradition. But Mahadevi has other philosophical and theological concepts that come up in her poetry. One of those is the search for the divine itself, or the search for a community that is also seeking the divine. So a poem like Not Seeing You is very much this, almost this chronicle of the speaker's quest to find the divine. And ultimately, I think we can at least infer that the end portion talks about finding the Virshiavas and finding this sort of kinship community of religious devotees to Shiva. So not Seeing You goes like this. Not seeing you in the hill, in the forest, from tree to tree, I roamed, searching, gasping, Lord, my Lord, come show me your kindness, till I met your men and found you. You hide, lest I seek and find. Give me a clue, O Lord, white as jasmine, to your hiding places. Now, this is kind of an interesting one, because on the one hand, Hinduism as a polytheistic religion, it's not an animistic religion. So it's not that every hill, every forest, every tree, etc. has a divinity or a divine spark or whatever it is. But there's a lot of gods in Hinduism. And one of the things that the Bakhti frequently critiqued about Orthodox Hinduism was the pervasiveness of gods. Basavana has a poem very, very strikingly about this. The first line of which is, "The pot is a god, the winnowing." And I don't think Mahadevi is doing quite the same thing here. This isn't, I wouldn't say this is a satire of Orthodox Hinduism. I wouldn't say that this is sort of, it's a ridiculous idea that there's gods everywhere, or whatever it is, in the way that Basavana seems to be doing. To me, Mahadevi seems, there's more of a loss here. There's a sense of sort of loss of not finding the spiritual guidance that the speaker of the poem is looking for. But then, till I found your men and found you. And to me, at least, I read this as a reference to finding the Virshiavas and again, becoming part of this community of fellow worshippers of Shiva and finding meaning in that. Now, one of the things that is interesting in that regard, if we take this poem, Not Seeing You, as sort of addressing this concern about a lack of accessibility to Shiva, to the Hindu gods more generally, whatever it is, then the poem that starts, "You are the forest," takes the opposite tack, right? It goes the opposite direction. So, "You are the forest. You are all the great trees in the forest. You are bird and beast playing in and out of all the trees. O Lord, white as jasmine, filling and filled by all. Why don't you show me your face?" So, in this instance, the poet persona clearly identifies Shiva as existing sort of without limit. You are the forest. You are all the great trees in the forest. You are bird and beast playing in and out of all the trees. Here we don't have the limitations, the limited access to Shiva of Not Seeing You. We have instead more this sort of traditional Orthodox Hindu approach of gods are available everywhere. And so there is this sort of interesting negotiation of the location of Shiva and what that location or locations means in terms of the very personal relationship that Mahadevi has with Shiva.